Hey everybody, welcome back to my jewelry bench. Today we're going to work on this beautiful solid gold DOXA watch. A little backstory on this watch. Apparently the owner of this watch had lost a diamond, stuck it in a jewelry box about 45 or 50 years ago, and there it sat until unfortunately her passing. Her daughter inherited the watch, brought it to one of my clients, and my clients asked me to do a restoration of this watch and shorten the band. So we're going to go ahead and get that done today. And of course, while you're here, check out my channel. There you're going to find a whole lot of playlists and videos covering clock repair, watch repair, jewelry design, jewelry repair, and other things. 3D printing, getting ready for casting, things like that. So if you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing to my channel. And if you like this video, by the time you watch it, hit the like button because it does help my channel grow. Thanks a lot, and let's get started. Okay, of course, the first thing we have to do is decase the watch. Now this is a beautiful solid gold watch, so you're going to have to be careful when you work on these. You don't want to scratch any of the gold, and I'm just going to use my hand tool to pry that open a little bit and just get the movement out of the case. I'm going to do a polish of this case when I'm done, but for now we're just going to get the movement out, and then we're going to take a look at the movement and see what kind of shape it's in. Now this watch, of course, has been sitting for quite some time, which means that the oil is probably all dried up. Any dust that was in the watch is probably settled in the pivots and the jewels, so we're going to have to go in there and do that full service. Before I go ahead and do that, we're going to pop off the plastic crystal that's on this watch and just take a quick assessment of the case condition and the strap condition. This watch is in really good shape, obviously, because it hasn't been worn much. The lost diamond is a result of a broken tip. So, just remember, whether it's a watch or a ring, tips do break off. They can catch on towels, clothing, sweaters, things like that, and bend and break. So you always run the risk. You should always have your jewelry checked, because you do always run the risk of a broken prong causing a loose stone, and that stone just popping right off of whatever jewelry you're wearing. So we're going to pull off the hands, get those hands put aside in the parts tray. Now I like to sort my parts by whatever, part of the watch they come out. So I sort them usually in whatever order I'm taking them off. And then as I clean them, I put them back in the parts tray where they were when I disassembled. And now this, if we look at this, got to be careful with this dial here also, because it is solid gold. So some DOXA watches, or a lot of DOXA watches from this era, were solid gold. They were very expensive, very high-class, high-end watches at the time. And here you can see I'm just pulling off the cannon pinion. I've already removed the hour wheel. And now we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of the watch. So this watch is pretty seized up, and I'm going to start by removing the balance cock, which is the complete balance, the balance wheel, hairspring, and balance bridge. I'm going to gently pull that and pry it off the movement. And these hairsprings, these Swiss hairsprings, are very, very delicate, so pull that complete balance off using the balance wheel, and just be cautious with it. Now here you can see I'm removing the pallet bridge. We're going to pull that pallet fork out. The watch did not want to unwind. I had to actually coax it, put a little oil on the movement to get it to unwind. Now I'm just going to remove the ratchet wheel for the mainspring. Now this is a reverse thread screw, so just be careful. Some of the DOXA watches do have regular threaded screws. Most of them do have reverse thread screws for this particular part. It does make it a little harder to get that put back on, because it'll unwind, or actually want to wind as you're threading it. We'll pull off the barrel bridge. 2 screws hold that in place. I didn't get that unscrewed quite enough, but we're going to twist the screw off and put it aside in our parts tray. Get that second screw out of there. And I'm just going to pry that bridge off the movement. Now there's a clutch screw, which allows you to loosen the clutch system up. I have left that tightened up for now, and it's just going to lift straight up over that clutch screw. Now we'll pull out the barrel. I'm a little problematic with my camera filming. I kept moving this around. It's a little hard to work on top of a camera while you're doing this. I'm going to come up with a different way of filming all this. Now I'm working on the train bridge. There's 2 screws that hold this train bridge in place, so I'm going to remove those 2 screws. Remember, those of you who are working on watches, to keep your screwdrivers nice and sharp and flat so that they work good on those screws. Get those 2 screws out of there, and then we're gently going to pry the train bridge off. And then I'll pull out the gears or the train itself. So I take these particular gears out in order of height from the top down, and we'll just put those aside in their own little tray on the parts tray. Now I'm going to tighten up the screws for the dial. And now we can remove the clutch system and the lever system from this. First we do is we loosen up that little clutch screw in there, and then we can pull out the clutch and ratcheting wheels for the time setting. And then I'll pull all the setting gears out and we'll go over to cleaning. Now I've already cleaned this watch at this point, so now it's time for assembly. I've got one of the clutch gears in place, and now we're going to get the other clutch gear in. Now these should fall right into their respective positions once you've assembled most of the lever system. And we can gently push in the crown and stem. Once we get that situated, I'm going to slightly tighten the clutch screw and push that crown all the way in. And now we can just give it a quick tightening and then test. So here you can see we've only got one click on this particular watch. So we'll check it on both sides, make sure that everything is articulated correctly. Now let's go for a new mainspring. I've installed the new mainspring. I didn't want to use the old one. I didn't know what kind of shape it was in. It wasn't in bad shape, but I did have this ready for this particular watch. So we'll just get it all seated correctly, oiled. Just use some nice spring oil in there. Not a lot. I'm not a big proponent of grease on a mainspring because grease tends to clog up the mainspring and slow down a watch relatively quickly. We'll work on the escapement wheel, getting that positioned. And then we'll just work our way through the train, setting each gear in its correct position. And once those 4 gears are in the correct position, we can move on to the train bridge and get that reseated onto the watch. Now, I like to usually put 1 screw in. I haven't done it at this point, but what I'm doing is I'm just trying to push these gears into place by rotating them just a little bit. Most of the time, they'll seat themselves. However, some of these watches, you'll just have to kind of poke and prod a little bit. Be very, very careful when you do that. You just want to kind of twist them a little bit until they fall into their respective jewels. When I get them kind of situated where I want them, I'll usually put a screw in about halfway, and a lot of times I'll work my way down to the whole train to get each gear in position. Sometimes I have to work under a microscope to do that on these tiny little watches. Once that train is in position, I'll put both screws back in and tighten them up. Here you can see we're working on the barrel bridge, putting that back in. I'll get both screws put on. The barrel bridge on this particular model watch is very easy. And get those screws tightened in place. The nice thing about having the stem and crown in the watch at this particular point is once I get the ratchet wheel back in place, I can go ahead and do a quick test. So you can see I'm just giving each pivot point a little bit, very little bit of oil on this particular model. Both upper and lower sides. Now we'll get the ratchet wheel for the barrel on. This is keyed, so I'm going to slightly turn that until it seats correctly on its key. Then we'll get that reverse threaded screw back on the watch. Remember, this is a reverse thread screw, so as you tighten it down, you're going to turn it counterclockwise. It should tighten down relatively easy. Remember not to over tighten it. You just want to give it enough so that it seats correctly. It'll hold on its own. Now we'll work our way over to the pallet fork. Pallet fork is a very, very delicate piece. You're going to have to be very careful, especially with these little old Swiss watches. These parts are very hard to get now, so if you do break one of these, it's going to be a difficult find to repair or replace. Now, I usually tighten these pallet bridges up about halfway, and then I will tinker with the pallet fork until I feel as though, or see it seat into place so that both pinions are in their jewels. And then I'll give it a slight little wind and test the pallet fork and make sure that it is functioning correctly, and then tighten that bridge down. Now, I did forget to turn on my camera here. Unfortunately, I was interrupted a couple times while I was working on this particular part, but we get that balance cock back in place. The balance staff is seated correctly. Now it's time to finish the assembly of the watch, and we'll loosen up the 2 dial screws, one on each side. I'll get the cannon pinion back on. With the cannon pinion seated correctly, I'll just run a quick test, and then we'll put the hour wheel on. With the hour wheel seated, we can put the dial back on the watch, tighten up the 2 dial screws, and make sure that everything works correctly. With the dial in place, the watch is working pretty good, and now I can seat the hands for the watch if I want to, which I will do now. First thing goes on is the hour hand on this particular watch, and then we are going to set the hand. Here you can see I'm aiming it to the 3 o'clock position just to give myself an alignment. And now I'll seat the minute hand. And if you've never used these watch hand pushers, I'll put a link to them in the description below where you can get those. And I'm just going to check the hands for height difference and make sure that there's no interference between the hands. So let's start working on the case. This is a solid gold case, all 14 karat. And what I want to do before I work on anything is remove all the old glue that was holding in the plastic crystal. The plastic crystal on this particular watch is in fantastic shape, so we're going to use it again instead of ordering a new one, which could take me a little time to find the right size, and we don't really have to in this case. Now, I would try to use a plastic pry tool to get the glue out. It didn't work good on this particular model, so I used one of my screwdrivers. I couldn't find my... I do have a tool that I made for doing this, but I just couldn't find it on my bench somewhere. Next thing I have to do is replace this diamond. It is about 2.1 millimeters. So I am going to replace the diamond with the appropriate size diamond on this. Before I go ahead and do that, the next thing I want to do is shorten this. It has to be shortened approximately a ½ inch per side. The woman who's going to be wearing this watch has very tiny wrists. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and saw off the 2 ends, the buckle end and the clasp end of the band, and shorten those and then resolder them. In this case, I'll probably be using my laser welder, which I ended up doing anyway because it was just a lot easier to laser weld it than it was to take a chance on having any solder flow through the band. I didn't want to stiffen it up anymore. I won't bore you with my sawing and filing, but this is part of jewelry repair. You do have to finish everything off by filing it, making sure everything fits properly before you go ahead and do any solder work. Of course, those of you who are jewelers understand the importance of never putting an emerald into an ultrasonic cleaner or using a torch near it, because you could really do some damage to an emerald. So what I'm doing here is I'm laser welding it and re-tipping the broken prong. I'm just laser welding the band together now, and what I'll do is I'll just give it a couple laser blasts here just to make sure it's settled right. And once everything's seated correctly, I'll go ahead and laser weld the entire band back together. Now here I'm just going to set the diamond, and unfortunately I forgot to turn on the camera while I was setting this diamond. So I got the diamond set, and now I'm just going to use a rubber wheel around the prong just to buff it out. And here you can see I'm just buffing the entire band and case, getting it all nice and polished and cleaned. I'm going to go ahead and hand clean this so that everything looks good after I'm done with this particular part of it. Again, you know, anytime you have emeralds or soft stones, never put them in an ultrasonic cleaner, because if they are cracked or damaged in any way, they're going to fall apart. So I'm just going to keep buffing the entire case and band out, and then we'll move on to the laser welds on the buckle and clasp. And I like to use an aggressive wheel on these. I use a rubber wheel to just take off any laser marks there, and then I'll use a fine rubber wheel to highly polish them up. Once I'm done with this step, I can go ahead and polish those clasp ends and get them looking real nice. And I'll go ahead and clean them all up. Now that I've got this all done and hand cleaned, I'm going to go ahead and reseat the crystal. I like to use a little bit of glue on the crystal. In this case, I'm using some UV crystal cement on it. And I can get that seated correctly and then use a UV light to cure that glue in a couple of minutes. Once that glue is cured, I know it's going to be sealed correctly, and from there I can go ahead and reseat or recase the watch. So a lot of us old-time watchmakers or watchmakers throughout history have always gone ahead and marked the movements, usually on the back of the case, the dates that we did our work and what we did. Some people use codes. I like to use abbreviations for all my marks. So I'll get that case back together with the watch movement inside. I've already gone ahead and timed this watch. It's working really good, and I'm sure this customer is going to be very happy and satisfied with the results. Guys, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to my channel. Don't forget to check out my channel for other videos where you can see other watch repairs, jewelry design, 3D printing tips, and reviews on resins and other things. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.